Hello, my name is Julieta. I'm a volunteer with the RCSGD, and we're going to be doing some presentations for y'all on queer and trans issues. So my presentation is on the TSA body scanners and how it relates to the gender binary. There is a content warning for this presentation for transphobia and the gender binary, so if y'all need to take a drink of water, take a break, or skip this presentation altogether, feel free. I just want y'all to take care of yourselves. So let's get started. What is the TSA? The TSA is the Transportation Security Administration in the US. They hold authority over the security of the traveling public. So we will be talking about the TSA in the context of airports and airport security. So if any of y'all have traveled recently, and I know I've been stuck inside for the last year, but recently, as in the last few years, you may have noticed the full body scanners at airport security. These are different from the metal detectors that we had growing up. They show the outline of a person's body to the TSA, and they'll highlight any object that appears out of place. This is to prevent things that should not be going on airplanes from going on, such as weapons or the 8-ounce water bottle you wanted to carry on. It's ultimately to keep its passengers and everyone safe. So the TSA will then review the passenger in the area highlighted, often with a pat down. So, what's the issue with the TSA body scanners? Well, before a person steps into the scanner, the TSA has to select the person's gender. They make this decision often based on a person's appearance, and often it's a snap-second decision, and it has nothing to do with how the person identifies to the TSA. Within the gender selected, there are only two options. There's a pink button for female and a blue button for male. Once the gender is selected, the scanner is going to look for a penis on a male and for breast for a female. So for people who are transgender or gender nonconforming, this can set off the machine to highlight the part of a person's body, and they will falsely perceive the body part as a threat, as something that should not be there. So let's talk about the gender binary and how it relates. So the gender binary is the classification of gender into two distinct and opposite genders of man and woman. So these are the two selections that the TSA has between the female pink button and the male blue button. We know that gender is so much more complex than this gender binary. There's people who identify as a man, there's people who identify as a woman, there's people who identify as a third gender, and there's so many different genders that people may identify as, or people may choose to not identify as any of them, or may choose gender nonconforming as the identity that is most accurate for them. All of these genders are equally valid, and the TSA system does not account for these. Gender itself is a social construct used to classify a person as man, woman, or another identity, like we talked about, and it's fundamentally different from the sex one is assigned at birth. So the sex one is assigned at birth has to do with their body and their anatomy and what they may present as physically with their body parts. However, there are so many nuances in people's bodies between their body parts, their genitalia, their gender identity, their sex assigned at birth, that there's no one way that a person of a certain gender or sex should look. And to say that this machine that has two options can encompass all of the variants within human bodies is ultimately not true. So what are the effects of this way of thinking and a machine and TSA system that falls behind this line of thinking. Well, when the TSA body scanners detect something, they'll highlight the problem area. These passengers are then subject to questioning and pat downs. These are both very invasive, and in the case of trans people and gender nonconforming people, there have been a couple of cases reported where, and if you need to skip through about a minute, you're welcome to. These people have had to show their private parts or remove their chest binders. So in the case of showing their private parts, this was a transgender woman, and she stepped through the checkpoint as the person passed her off as a female person. They then asked her if she would like to be passed through the checkpoint as a male, and both times this person was identified as a problem and needed to be pat down. So then there was the issue of whether this transgender woman should be pat down by a man or by a woman TSA officer. And she felt more comfortable with a woman patting her down, but it showed the lack of training and respect for people who are transgender and gender nonconforming. So ultimately, this person showed their private parts to these people, which was not part of the TSA's protocol and completely inappropriate and very stress, anxiety, and trauma inducing in this individual. And their story is in one of the sources that I'll show to y'all in the end if you want to learn more. Another person had to remove their chest binders in also an incredibly invasive pat down. And ultimately, these scanners have caused stress, anxiety, and trauma to so many people who are transgender and gender nonconforming. Those are just a couple of stories of people who have experienced stress at the TSA body scanners. And some people have reported these issues to the TSA. They are well aware of these issues. However, many people have not reported these issues. And that's not a judgment on reporting or not reporting, but it is to show that there are so many more people that may have been affected that their stories are not being heard or seen by the TSA. So, overall, shortcomings in the technology used by the TSA and insufficient training of the agency's staff have made transgender and gender nonconforming travelers particularly vulnerable to invasive searches at airport checkpoints. And this is backed up by interviews, a review of documents, and data. So what can we do? I'm going to highlight a couple of the main points again and provide some solutions. So Maya Angelou said, "The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free." And this applies to the issue that the TSA body scanners not only affect people who are trans and gender nonconforming, but they also disproportionately affect people with disabilities, people who wear head coverings for religious reasons, as the person on your left is, and people with particular hairstyles, and these hairstyles are primarily worn by people of color and women of color. So what can we do? We need to modify the scanners or build better ones. These scanners should not be based on the gender binary and selecting one of two genders. This system of picking between genders, especially without asking people, but picking someone's gender should not be a question about their safety or their right to travel. And ultimately, if your machine cannot tell the difference between a body part and between a weapon, then that machine should not be used. The TSA itself also has ineffective training. So the TSA has training regarding transgender people or gender nonconforming people, but this training has been questioned by its own employees. The training is ineffective or not taken seriously. And it not being taken seriously may have to do with societal issues and a lack of education, especially among LGBTQIA plus folk. But the training itself needs to be comprehensive education. So we need to modify the TSA. We need to give them better programs and training so they can accurately and respectfully handle situations such as these and different identities. The TSA is also ineffective in itself. Undercover investigators working for the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General managed to sneak fake guns, knives, and explosives through checkpoints in 2017. These mock weapons got through 70% of the time. So these systems and checkpoints that the TSA has to keep people safe is ultimately not keeping them safe, as we can see through the amount of fake weapons that are able to get through. They are not only ineffective in keeping mock weapons from getting through and keeping people safe, but they are actually causing harm to people such as transgender and gender non-conforming people. So what can we do about this? The TSA may need to go beyond reform to breaking it down and trying a new system that caters to the needs of LGBTQIA people and other marginalized genders and identities. So we've reached the end of our presentation. Here are our sources. If you wanted to look at a few stories like the one I was talking about earlier, you can go ahead and look at the second one with ProPublica. And I also highly recommend the RCSGD's education page. And here are some resources that I'm going to leave y'all with, just in case y'all need to engage in self-care. Thank you.